heavy metal.
Bro, this is my favorite. He farts.
The genre that is so nearest and dearest to all of us. When was it invented? Well, let's say like 1970, right? So that's like what? 80, 90, 2000, 2010. Over 50 years old. That's old. So today, I want to talk about who I believe to be the 12 most important bands that have ever existed in the metal genre. So start in the early days and go chronologically up to present day and identify who I believe to be the most significant bands that have ever existed. So I'm using like two criteria to identify these bands, right? A, they have to be super influential, and B, they have to be culturally significant, right? So are you guys ready to come on a journey with me all the way back to 1970 in a little UK city called Birmingham? This is a glorious city of Birmingham. There was a little band called Black Sabbath. Well, heavy music did definitely exist before Black Sabbath, but not in the way that we know it, right? You know, some people point to like Helter Skelter by the Beatles. But it doesn't really sound like the metal that we know, right? And there's also that other song, that Summertime Blues, that song that everyone always references. It's just like heavy psychedelic rock, right? I mean, like, compare that to Black Sabbath, right? This sort of sounds a lot closer to the metal that we are familiar with. You've got the very heavy distorted guitars, super heavy drums, dark lyrical themes. And what's cool about Sabbath, right? It doesn't sound as dated as you'd expect something from this era to sound like. Before we go any further, I just want to let you know that I'm now offering a 7-day free trial for my online guitar school. Unlock the entire archive of super fun lessons, exercises, and content, as well as Discord access and guided weekly mentoring from me. Click the link in the description below to visit Bradley Hall's Guitar School and sign up today for free. And now, we fast forward up to 1980. Iron Maiden. So we're shifting from Birmingham, fucking Mordor, and we're moving to London. This is a good picture for London. So I believe that they took that metal blueprint of what bands in the 70s have been doing, like Judas Priest, Deep Purple, but it just sort of like took that, but really like evolved it and took it to the next level. The musicianship was way better. The songs were faster. You know, the vocals were fucking massive. You know, in my opinion, like Bruce Dickinson invented the archetypal heavy metal frontman. Yeah, another thing, right, with Iron Maiden is the harmonized guitar leads. Maiden sort of like brought it into like a heavier context. You know, bands are still fixated on doing harmonized leads in metal just because it sounds fucking awesome. We're going forward just a few years to probably the most obscure, smallest band on this list. Metallica. Metallica. Oh, it makes sense. Metallica, the biggest metal band on the planet. For anyone who hasn't heard Metallica before. One thing people don't realize why Metallica is so popular, right? They took what was otherwise a fairly fringe thing to like the fucking stratosphere, right? You know, next level songwriting, musicianship, everything was just like done so much better and made the Black Album. That album still sounds fucking amazing today. It sounds like it could have been produced like last year. So, the next band I know a lot of you are going to enjoy. Who's this? Who's heard of a little genre called death metal, where like the guitars are really sort of like, and the drums are like, and the vocals are like. Some people argue that this band invented death metal, Possessed. So this album came out in 1985, which predates Death's first album by 2 years. But if you really listen to the difference in these two albums, so this is Possessed. So to me, this doesn't sound like death metal. This just sounds like, I guess, more extreme thrash metal. But if you go and listen to Scream Bloody Gore, which is 2 years later, now that sounds more like early death metal to me. Not really thrash anymore. It's like starting to be its own thing. Death were probably like the first like straight up death metal band, and I put Death instead of Possessed as well because I feel like Death are just way more influential. They're definitely the godfathers of that sort of tech death sound. All right, and moving on, we have the pioneers of another extreme metal genre. Venom, Bathory, Hellhammer, etc. They were definitely doing like the black metal thing super early. But when you really think about it in terms of overall influence and in terms of cultural significance, there's only one band really that has stood the test of time and has transcended that genre. It's Mayhem. So for any of you who don't know, there was this spate of like black metal kids in Norway doing shenanigans like burning churches, stabbing each other, like killing all their fellow band members. You know, it really gave an added notoriety and infamy to the genre, right? Yeah, the very first album was actually 1987, which is super early. Early Mayhem is like really, really punky. So I guess this is sort of like the defining black metal album. They're so culturally significant. It's sort of like transcended beyond just being a band. It's just like a phenomenon, right? They're pretty much solely responsible for the explosion and notoriety of black metal, which I think deserves them a spot on this list. Like even in the mainstream, that's why you get like, was it Kanye West wearing like Burzum shirts and shit? I don't think this sort of stuff would be anywhere near as popular and infamous as it wasn't for Mayhem. So we're moving on. Around the same sort of time, there's a few we could have put as like the pioneers of the power metal sound. But when you really think about like what we know now as power metal, I think Helloween definitely got it the closest, right? For example, if we go and listen to their classic album, Keeper of the Seven Keys, I believe. You know, it's sort of like the speed metal beat with the double kick. And the fucking vocals all like... They had it. They'd like nailed the formula already by like 1988. And when you think about it, power metal really hasn't moved on that much, you know, from this sort of sound. Like... So, there's only one band really that sort of like epitomizes 90s metal. Terry Crews! Of course it's Pantera. Like, come on. Pantera are the definitive 90s band. Yeah, I would say that Pantera are probably the third most influential metal band of all time, only behind Sabbath and Metallica. Shakes up the whole metal world, reinvented the way you play metal guitar, reinvented the way metal guitar sounds. All right, so we're moving on, but we're staying in the 90s. Dream Theater, the definitive progressive metal band.
Big Chungus, Big Chungus.
It's easy to take for granted that sort of sound, the typical prog metal sound that we all know and, well, love or hate. But when you think about it, when Dream Theater were first coming on the scene, what year is their first album? 1989, what the fuck? There was nothing like this, like, at all. You know, if you think of like Images and Words was when, like, 92. It sounds like a fucking Alien album. You know, you got the cool sort of like 90s plinky plonky synth, virtuosic lead playing, crazy time signatures. You know, we're lucky that the first band that really did it turned out to be the best band, I guess. Musicians have got obviously a lot better on average since the 90s, but this stuff is still considered pretty damn technical, right? It's like the soundtrack to Falling Down the Stairs.
I'm coming.
They succeeded in making prog music as cool as you could possibly make it, right? Because before this, you just had like... Straight man to the late man. They gave it some balls, some cojones. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, they fucking nailed it, dude.
Big Chungus.
All right. So the next one, we're staying in the 90s. We're going on to 1995, I believe. I don't really feel like this band as a whole is as influential, but they definitely deserve a mention at the gates. Even though they're definitely nowhere near as influential overall as most of the other bands on this list, their style of riffing was fucking light years ahead of its time. So this album came out in 1995. Where you it's sort of like chugging on the bottom string and then sort of like doing some like notes above it on the string up, right? This kind of thing. This is basically just like metalcore riffing, right? 15 years earlier. All this kind of stuff. Like that is just like fucking at the gates ripoff. And even like this stuff with like the harmonized like octaves, like that's a fucking at the gates thing as well. So 3 bands left. We're in like the early 2000s now. We have a little genre called new... Oh, fucking hell. I jump scared myself. So a little genre called new metal. Pretty much every band in this kind of era sounded very, very different from one another. You know, like Sode, Linkin Park, Slipknot, Bizkit. You know, quite a vast array of different sounds going on, right? And I think Slipknot was perhaps the band that has really had the most lasting influence out of that era. I think they're one of those generational bands that really sort of like shook things up big time. There's rapping turntable shit, and then you've got basically what is essentially death metal, right? It's sort of shoved together. When you think about it, Iowa is basically just like a death metal album, essentially. It's the world's most accessible death metal album, right? So there's a number of reasons why I think they were so influential. There's the obvious, right? The aesthetic. They stood out a mile from other bands because there was like, is it 9 of them, right? And they were all like in fucking boiler suits and masks. Anyway, so yeah, not just the aesthetic, but also the style of riffing. Just that kind of like really simple, like groovy, fucking drop B, chug, like fucking caveman riffs. I think Slipknot is like the fucking OGs of that. Who do you think we're talking about next?
Who are we talking about, boys and girls?
Bloody Meshuggah! The godfathers of Gent. The progenitors of the modern metal sound. A band that was so fucking far ahead of its time is actually absurd. So fucking big brain and innovative. That like it took literally 15 years for like the rest of the metal world to catch up. If we go all the way back to freaking 1995, Meshuggah is fucking doing this. What the fuck? And what's weird as well is like this is more complicated and goes fucking harder than like a lot of like modern gent stuff. Still, like what? Going forward 3 years later, when they've like refined their sound a bit, it's just absolutely bonkers. It just doesn't make any sense to me. This isn't made by humans. All right, guys, we have one more band. This is a 2010s band. Who is it? Yes, it's Weezer! So, metalcore and metal are no longer one of the same. They've split off into like two very different entities and subcultures, right? And that is all thanks to, well, to a few bands, but more than not, it's down to Bring Me the Horizon. So I think you can trace this back to 2013. Shadow Modes is like this sort of stuff. And what's funny is that like this song still sounds like a lot of metalcore you hear today with all this sort of shit. It's like the crowd chanting and like the, you know, the do. And what's cool is like this band has like always been one step ahead. You know, the very early days, you know, they were a deathcore band originally, right? And then they went modern metalcore pioneers. After that, they like reinvented themselves again, doing this sort of stuff, which is sort of like, it's like Linkin Park kind of worship. This was in 2015, right? This still sounds pretty fresh because like so many bands are like ripping off this sound. There we have it. In my opinion, the 10, 11 or 12 most influential metal bands of all time. These bands are the ones that sort of like defined the different eras of metal. The trailblazers, the innovators, or just simply the ones who did it best. Or in Mayhem's case, the one who burned the most churches.